Ronnie Cohen, on behalf of the SNP.
Thank you very much, Mr Stringer, and I congratulate the honourable member for Dumfriesshire, Clydesdale and Tweeddale for bringing forward this debate today. I'd like to put on record that I am a trustee of the charity Intractable Epilepsy. Our aim is to raise money to fund the purchase of medical cannabis for children with intractable epilepsy. Details are contained within my register of interest. And it is appropriate that this debate has been held on this date, the 20th of April. A happy 420 to everyone. Some people know what I'm talking about. In March 2019, the Health Secretary Matt Hancock reassured parents of children living with life-threatening epilepsy when he said medical cannabis would be made available on the NHS. Of course, this never happened. Instead, he threw the problem over the wall and left the health professionals to deal with it, and they haven't. I've raised the issue of the provision of medical cannabis numerous times, I think it's 36, in this place, and every time the UK Government has ignored my plea and reverted back to their default position of cannabis is bad. Their lack of knowledge is evident by the way in which they confuse synthetics like spice and mamba with marijuana. And this is the background against which parents and guardians have constantly lobbied the UK Government in order to provide medical cannabis on the NHS, and I have tried to support them as best I can. Clearly, we were wrong in our approach, and I apologise to those children and their parents for my shortcomings. I appealed to the moral or the ethical approach, and I appealed to this Government who could repeatedly tell us they have a compassionate approach to governance. And what I've found today is that what I should have done is what the Right Honourable Member for Dumfriesshire, Clydesdale and Tweeddale has done, and made the economic argument instead. Because while parents struggle to raise the thousands of pounds required just to keep their kids alive, this Government has ignored them. But once we start highlighting the potential for making money, the UK Government's ears prick up. And I'm not criticising the Right Honourable Member. If that's what it takes to get the Government to engage, then so be it. Because engage they must, because people are suffering needlessly. I went to great lengths in my budget speech to highlight the benefits to the UK Government of supporting the hemp industry. And much of this argument is the same, because it's the same plant we're trying to grow. While the UK Government insists that cannabis is a drug in the Class B of the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971 and MDA in Schedule 1 of the Misuse of Drugs Regulations 2001, and that all varieties are treated the same, then we are failing to understand that cannabis is a very complex plant with over 483 compounds. Because of the UK Government's bias and ignorance, they have turned their back on the potential the plant has, and indeed the known benefits too. In fact, there are over 50,000 uses for the hemp plant. Medical cannabis is only one of them. Finding markets for hemp would not be a problem. So allow myself the indulgence of reminding us all of some of them. It's estimated that a medium-sized economically viable establishment would employ 120 people. When it was widely grown back in the 16th century, in those enlightened days of King Henry VIII, it was used to manufacture rope and canvas for the King's Navy. But now we know we can make clothing, shoes, biodegradable plastic, insulation panels, food, paper, biofuels and medicine. These products will sell, they will be profitable, and the Government could reap the benefits. But it doesn't end there. Hemp absorbs 22 tonnes per hectare of atmospheric carbon during its 4-month growing cycle. Hemp produces 4 times the biomass of the same-sized area of forest, making it far more sustainable source of material. Hemp doesn't need pesticides, insecticides or fertiliser to grow in the UK. Hemp has natural antimicrobial properties, so it passively cleans the air in buildings. Hemp has a high capacity for moisture absorption, allowing for a controlled atmosphere within buildings. Hemp construction materials act as a long-term carbon sink. One £60 million investment would create a facility that's capable of growing 32,000 acres per year. That would sequester over 207,000 tonnes of CO2 per annum. That's the CO2 photosynthesised by the hemp in its 4-month growth. That doesn't include the carbon sequestered into the soil or the net effect of replacing high embodied carbon products from international supply chains and their emissions. And, as a wee bonus, hemp regenerates the soil it grows in, so it would work well in crop rotation. It increases winter wheat and spring barley yields by 16 to 18% when they follow hemp in rotation. And it cleans groundwater. By that it means it's a deep root and root mass that absorbs residual pesticides and insecticides from the soils, preventing runoff into streams and rivers and therefore avoiding the costly remediation by the water companies to achieve UK drinking water standards. And the barrier to this industry raising the funding it requires is licensing. Licensing problems which, as far as I'm aware, the company mentioned by the right honourable member of Hilltop Leaf are currently banging their heads up against. They want to grow, they want to expand, they have built the facility. They cannot get a licence from the UK government to allow them to expand. And the problem with licensing is the categorisation of cannabis. To make the cannabis industry a success, the government only has to open its mind to the reality of what it is and distribute the appropriate licences to the appropriate growers. And that will only be possible if cannabis is recategorised. So while I welcome everything and anything that encourages the provision of medical cannabis, I would say the UK government's knowledge has to increase if it's to truly capitalise on the hemp plant and provide the good outcomes that are available. I would prefer that the UK government came to the table driven by a desire to provide medicine for people suffering from a range of conditions, and we will need a supply chain from private companies to do that. But if it's drawn closer by the lure of tax revenue, then so be it. But we can't wait any longer. The patients that require medical cannabis to help them towards better lives have waited far too long for this government to recognise their need and act accordingly. And finally, Mr Stinger, the argument that we need more research is no longer viable. The argument that cannabis is bad and we can't countenance its use is misplaced. Rather than standing on the sidelines, shuffling their feet, it is now time the UK government were proactive in funding and promoting the growth of the feedstock, the academic research, the production of the medicines, providing and promoting the necessary training for GPs to allow them to prescribe, and ensuring that the legal framework exists to allow the medical profession to carry out their duties for protecting them and their patients, which by my reckoning would mean the involvement of DEFRA, BAYS, Home Office, Health, and as there's no show without punch, the Treasury too. Minister, it's time to go to work.